I remember the day I buried my baby, as if the world itself had stopped breathing. The air was heavy, the sky hung low, and I could feel the soil tremble beneath my shaking hands. I was 24 then, too young to understand the full weight of grief, but old enough to feel it hollow me out from the inside. The doctors had told me it was a stillbirth. My little girl, my firstborn, she never took a breath, they said. I never got to hold her, not properly. They showed me a tiny, still body wrapped in a white sheet, and before I could even process what had happened, they said they'd take care of the burial arrangements. I signed the papers through tears I couldn't see through, trusting that the hospital knew best. Years passed, but grief doesn't age. It just burrows deeper, learning how to hide inside smiles. I tried to move on. I had 2 more children later in life, though both left home as soon as they could. My husband, Robert, was kind at first, but distant. He didn't like to talk about the baby we lost. He said it was better to let the past rest. But how could I, when my past had a heartbeat that never got to beat? Now I'm 76, living alone in a creaky old house that still smells faintly of lilacs from the garden I once planted with such care. The house feels emptier with every passing year. My knees ache, my heart skips beats, and some mornings I forget where I put my glasses, or why I even bothered looking for them. My children rarely visit. They say they're busy. I understand. Life moves faster for them than it ever did for me. When the agency sent me a new caretaker, I didn't expect much. I'd had 3 in the past 2 years. Each one left because they said I was too stubborn. Maybe they were right. I still insisted on doing things myself, even when my hands shook pouring tea. But the moment she walked in, I felt something strange. She was in her 30s, maybe early 40s, with deep brown eyes that carried an unsettling calm. There was something familiar about her, something I couldn't name. Her voice, soft yet firm, had an odd echo in my mind, as if I'd heard it long ago in a dream. "Mrs. Fletcher," she said gently, "I'm your new caretaker. My name is Grace." Grace. The name lingered in the air like a faint melody. I smiled faintly, but my chest tightened. I didn't know why. I'd met so many caretakers. Why did this one make my skin prickle with déjà vu? Over the first few days, she moved around the house like she'd lived here all her life. She knew where the sugar was kept without asking. She even knew how I liked my tea, strong, 1 cube of sugar, and no milk. I asked her once how she knew. She just smiled and said, "I can tell a lot from people's eyes." Her eyes. Lord, those eyes. Brown with golden flecks that caught the light exactly the way my late husband's did. But it wasn't that. It was something else. Something buried deep in my bones, something I couldn't yet face. At night, I'd hear her humming softly from the kitchen while washing dishes, and the melody felt hauntingly familiar, like the lullaby I used to hum when I was pregnant all those years ago. My breath would catch, and I'd tell myself, "Don't be foolish, Margaret. It's just a coincidence." But coincidences don't make your heart race at the sound of a name. One evening, I woke from a nap to find her sitting quietly beside my bed. She smiled when she saw my eyes open. "You were talking in your sleep," she said softly. "You kept saying, 'my baby.'" I felt heat rise to my face. I dream of her sometimes," I whispered. "My first child. She was stillborn." Grace's expression softened in a way that made my stomach twist. "I'm sorry," she said. "That must have been very hard." I nodded slowly, trying to shake off the unease. But before she left the room, I saw her wipe a tear from her cheek. And that night, I couldn't sleep. Something about her sorrow didn't seem like sympathy. It felt personal. Days turned into weeks. Grace became part of my routine, cooking my meals, reading to me in the evenings, brushing my hair when my arthritis flared up. I found comfort in her presence, yet unease simmered beneath the surface. She asked a lot of questions about my past, about the hospital where my baby was born, about my husband, about what happened afterward. At first, I thought she was just being kind, helping me reminisce. But one afternoon, when I mentioned the doctor's name who delivered my baby, she froze. "Dr. Wallace?" she repeated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Was that in Maplewood Hospital?" "Yes," I replied, surprised. "You know it?" She hesitated before answering. "I worked there once, a long time ago. They had some questionable practices back in those days." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" But she didn't answer. She just smiled faintly and changed the subject. That night, I pulled out my old photo album, the one with faded pictures and forgotten memories. I sat under the yellow lamp, my hands trembling as I turned the brittle pages. Pictures of my wedding, my first house, my second son's graduation. But one photo caught my eye, an old black and white image of me, heavily pregnant, sitting on the hospital bed. In the corner of the picture was a nurse, blurry but visible enough. Her eyes, those same golden brown eyes, staring straight at the camera. I dropped the photo. No, it couldn't be. Grace wasn't old enough to be that nurse. But she had those same eyes, and that same faint birthmark under her left ear. My heart began to pound as I whispered to myself, "Who are you, Grace?" She came in moments later, holding a tray of tea. She smiled warmly, but this time I saw it, the flicker of something behind her expression. A secret, a memory. And then, softly, she said, "You shouldn't stay up too late, Mother. You need your rest." Mother. The cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. The shards sang across the floor, a bright, brittle music that didn't belong in my bedroom. For a long second, I couldn't move. The word hovered in the air between us, an apparition dressed in a single syllable. Mother. Grace didn't flinch at the crash. She set the tray on my dresser with a steadiness that unsettled me more than the word itself, then crouched to gather the porcelain fragments with her bare hands. "Don't," I managed, my voice a thread. "You'll cut yourself." "I'm careful," she said, eyes down, voice low. "I've had practice." Practice. The room was too warm. The curtains felt too heavy for November. I pressed my palm to my sternum, willing my heart to settle. She rose after a moment, the broken pieces cupped like white shells in her palms, and carried them to the trash. When she turned back, I was already gripping the sides of my blanket, ready to demand an explanation. But her gaze gentled and something inside me retreated, a mother animal wary of her own instincts. "Why did you call me that?" I whispered. "Why would you say that?" Her throat bobbed. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again and looked at the floor. When she finally spoke, her words arrived carefully, like footsteps on ice. "Because I wanted to see if it echoed for you the way it echoes for me." I stared at her. The silence swelled until it pressed against my ears. "You're scaring me," I said, though what I meant was, "You're waking up every ghost I've ever learned to make tea for." "I'm sorry." She stepped closer but kept a respectful distance, hands clasped in front of her like a penitent. "I should have chosen a different moment. I've been searching for you for a very long time." "For me?" I felt something tilt in my chest. "What are you talking about?" She nodded toward the chair and asked, "May I sit?" When I didn't answer, she pulled it back and lowered herself onto the edge. Her movements were deliberate, nearly ceremonial. I watched her hands because I couldn't meet her eyes yet. Those hands, capable, young, familiar in ways my mind refused to catalogue. She folded them in her lap as if she were trying to hold her own trembling still. "My name is legally Grace," she said, "but I was not born with that name." Plenty of people change their names, I said, sharper than I intended, shielding myself with trifles. It doesn't make them mine. Her eyes lifted, and for the first time I saw the storm banked behind them. No, she agreed softly. Documents don't make people belong, but sometimes they reveal who took belonging away. I inhaled, air dragging like a wet cloth through my lungs. Say what you mean. She nodded, as if she'd prepared for this, rehearsed it while washing my cups, while folding my cardigans, while humming a lullaby she shouldn't have known. I believe I am your daughter, she said. The one you were told didn't survive. The room went so quiet I could hear the wall clock counting its heartbeats. I wanted to laugh, because disbelief sometimes looks like laughter on older faces, but my mouth wouldn't move. I wanted to scream, because hope is the cruelest intruder, and I have learned to deadbolt my doors. Instead, I said very carefully, "That's not possible." Her gaze didn't waver. "It is, and I can show you why I think so." "Think so?" I snapped, hope and fury colliding. "You think so? Do you know what it costs a woman to hold a grave inside her for 50 years? "I do," she whispered, and the way her voice broke on the second word opened a small, reluctant slit in my doubt. "Because I've been carrying a grave of my own. Empty, like a mouth that never got to speak." I closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids, memory gathered. The antiseptic glare of Maplewood's hallway lights, Dr. Wallace's dry voice, the way the nurse with the golden-flecked eyes had pressed my hand and said, "Sleep now." The hospital handled the burial, and I let them. God forgive me, I let them, because grief can be a narcotic when it's administered by someone in a white coat. "Start from the beginning," I said, my voice thin. "Start from your beginning." Grace's hands tightened in her lap. "The woman who raised me, my adoptive mother, told me I was found at a church drop-box. She said the nuns called me Grace because I arrived on a rainy Tuesday, and I lived because someone else showed mercy. She loved me fiercely, more fiercely than most people love anything. She died 5 years ago. After she died, I went looking for my paperwork because grief made questions grow in places where only love had been before. The papers were inconsistent. Dates didn't line up. There were copies of copies. Some signatures looked traced. And there was a hospital stamp from Maplewood on the back of an adoption transfer note that was supposed to have come from a parish. "Maplewood," I repeated, hardly aware I'd spoken. She nodded. I started calling people, clerks, retired nurses, anybody whose names came up in archive scans. Most numbers were dead, but one nurse lived 2 towns over. She remembered a doctor who ran certain arrangements. He'd lost his license twice in other states. He'd come here because nobody checks the basement when the foyer is full of flowers. "I don't understand," I said, though a part of me did and was already keening. She said there were cases, few but horrible, where stillbirths were recorded for poor women, undocumented women, women who'd come alone. Babies were taken, sold sometimes placed through closed channels with desperate families who asked too few questions and paid cash. And sometimes, she swallowed hard, sometimes the mother never saw the body. "I saw her," I protested, anger flaring like a defense instinct from an old animal. "She was wrapped. She was so small, but she was still, and you were sedated," Grace said gently. "And it was the 70s, and men like Dr. Wallace knew exactly how grief and drugs and paperwork could erase a woman's certainty about her own body." The words were tenderly spoken and landed like a hammer. Something cracked in me with a sound only I could hear. My mind reeled backward, the weight in my belly gone too soon, the heaviness in my arms that was never filled. The burial I did not attend because the hospital told me it was better to rest. "Rest, Mrs. Fletcher. We'll take care of everything." I tried to stand and my knees betrayed me. The room tilted and Grace was at my side in an instant, steady as a pillar. I caught the scent of her hair, clean, a little like rosemary, and the sob rose so fast it shocked me. I pressed my fist to my mouth until the tremor passed. "I am not asking you to believe me on faith," she murmured. "I brought proof, or pieces of proof. Will you look?" I nodded because refusing would have been a kind of cowardice I could not tolerate in myself. She went to the hall closet and returned with a canvas bag I'd seen her carry on every shift. She placed it on my bed, unzipped it, and removed a small tin box, the kind that once held toffee. Her fingers were careful, almost reverent as she opened it. Inside lay a tangle of artifacts that looked like they had been gathered by a woman scavenging her way through a ruined church. Photocopies, a rosary half broken, a plastic hospital band yellowed by time, a creased Polaroid, a paper with a faint official seal. She laid them out in a neat row on the blanket between us, her hand hovering over each as if introducing me to a table of guests. "This," she said, touching the hospital band, "was found in a box of mixed paperwork at a charity that took over the parish storage when the parish closed. I volunteer there sometimes. It was labelled Infant, Maplewood. Look at the ink." I lifted it with shaking fingers. The plastic was brittle. The ink, faded to a fragile ghost of blue, read, "Baby Girl Fletch." The last letters were smudged, but the shape was unmistakable. I couldn't breathe. "Here," she went on quietly, "is the adoption note with the Maplewood stamp on the back. No date on the front. The clerk who helped me said stamps like this were sometimes used by hospital staff to bless internal transfers. But this one's on a parish letter." I put it down because if I looked any longer, the past would put its hands around my throat. "And this," she said, sliding the Polaroid closer, "came from the retired nurse. She kept it all these years. Why, I don't know. Maybe because she couldn't bear to destroy a face. She wanted to clear her conscience. She gave me the picture and a name. She said the man in charge took babies with dark hair because they were easier to place. She said he kept one thing from each child like a trophy. A ribbon, a photo, a tag. The Polaroid showed a newborn, not more than a day old, eyes closed, a mouth like a pale petal. A thin braid of thread lay near the shoulder, red and white. In the corner, written in careful, modest script, B.G. Fletch. The child's ear bore a tiny freckle, a dot not far from the curve, like a planet close to its sun. I pressed my fingers to my own ear because I could not explain the inexplicable impulse to mirror. My ear has a freckle in the same place, small and unremarkable, a thing I never included when describing myself to anyone who asked. I looked up. Grace had a faint mark beneath her left ear, lower, a birthmark I'd noticed in the old photo of the nurse, a coincidence that had seemed impossible when it was only one, and now had volume. "You think you are her," I whispered, and my voice wasn't cruel anymore. It was tired and frightened and newly, perilously alive. "I think I might be," she answered. "And if I am not, I am at least one of the women he took. One of the babies who was labelled a ghost while learning to breathe somewhere else." A gust of wind thumped the window as if the night itself had opinions. I stared at the artifacts again, at the tiny plastic band that had waited, yellowing and stubborn, for my old hands. I thought of the cemetery plot that bore a small stone and a name, and I wondered what lay beneath it. For 50 years I had visited that patch of earth and told it stories and asked it for forgiveness and left it lilies on April days when the light looked like it might forgive me back. The idea that nothing lay there, that an emptiness had been salted like a field, it made a howl build in my bones. I began, and stopped, because saying "I want" out loud felt dangerous in a house that had learned to accommodate so many resignations. "What do you want?" Grace asked, her voice nearly a prayer. I want to know the truth, I said. All of it, even if it breaks me. She nodded as if she'd been waiting for that permission, or granting it to herself in my voice. There are 2 ways, she said. We can test, saliva, a kit. It won't undo the past, but it can shine a small light. And we can talk to the people who are still alive. The nurse gave me a list. Dr. Wallace is difficult, but not unreachable. The name fell like a stone into a well. I felt the ripples collide with grief, with rage, with something that had slept in a dark room for half a century and was now standing on its unsteady legs. What would we even say to him? The truth, she answered, or the question that rhymes with it. I looked at her then, really looked. The curve of her cheek, the stubborn set of her mouth when she hovered over the papers, the way her eyes softened when she waited for me to catch up. I could not claim familiarity, but recognition is not a legal instrument. It is a river that finds old banks without asking. Take me to that grave tomorrow, I said, voice steadier. The one I've been tending like a shadow. If the soil will tell me anything, I want to hear it. Tomorrow, she promised. I reached out before I could tell myself not to and took her hand. It was warm, and there was a tiny callus just below the ring finger, where a pen must sit when someone writes too much. A caretaker's hand, a keeper's hand. She did not squeeze back too hard, just enough to say, I'm real, I'm here, I'm not pretending. When I let go, the room seemed changed, as though someone had moved a wall a few inches to the left. I did not know what I believed, only that the world where my baby died had shifted on its hinges. Rest now, she said, though both of us knew neither of us would sleep much. She gathered the artifacts back into the tin with the same reverence, then the tin into the canvas bag. Before she left, she paused by the door. One more thing, she said. I didn't come only because I wanted to find you. Why then? Because someone else has been looking, she said, voice dipping. And not kindly. The lamp hummed, my skin pebbled. Who? I don't know yet, she swallowed, a small, visible effort. But 2 weeks ago, my apartment was searched while I was at work. Nothing was taken. Only the envelope with the nurse's list was opened and put back wrong. I started sleeping with the tin in my bag. I stared at the bag on my bed like a small animal that might bite. The old house creaked around us, its bones speaking in the language of drafts and settling. Far off, a dog barked once. Grace's eyes found mine through the dusk, and something like resolve passed between us. Tomorrow, I repeated. She nodded and closed the door gently behind her. I lay back, my heart counting its way through a wilderness it had never mapped, and somewhere beneath the clock's patient ticking I thought I heard it, the echo of a lullaby, not hummed but remembered by the walls themselves. And for the first time in 50 years, I let myself wonder if a grave might be only a question someone had answered too quickly. The next morning, the sky hung grey and heavy over the lilac bushes that bordered my yard, as if even the heavens were unsure whether to weep or hold back. I hadn't slept a minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that plastic hospital band, glowing faintly in the dark like a ghostly bracelet meant for 2 wrists, hers and mine. Grace arrived early, dressed simply, her hair tied back, a quiet determination in her step. She made tea, but neither of us drank it. The steam curled and faded between us, vanishing into the still air of the kitchen. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" she asked softly. I nodded. My throat felt raw. I've waited 50 years to bury peace. If I have to dig it up now, so be it. We drove in silence to the Quest Cemetery. The same narrow road, the same drooping oak trees arching like weary sentinels. My hands trembled in my lap as we approached the small plot under the elm. The one marked Baby Fletcher, April 1974. For decades I'd come here with flowers and whispered apologies. But now the grave felt like a lie, a sealed envelope holding someone else's story. Grace stood beside me, her hands clasped in front of her. The chill of early winter bit at our cheeks. "Do you want me to stay back?" she asked. "No," I said after a long pause. "If what you're saying is true, then this grave belongs to both of us." The caretaker of the cemetery, an old man named Harris, met us with gentle courtesy. I'd known him since Robert's passing. I told him I needed to exhume for DNA verification. My voice barely held steady. He didn't ask questions, just nodded, his eyes heavy with sympathy. "We can arrange it discreetly," he said. "But Mrs. Fletcher, are you sure you want to see?" I wasn't sure of anything anymore. They began late that afternoon. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of damp soil. I stood behind the safety line, my coat buttoned to my chin, as two men carefully dug into the earth that had held my grief for half a century. Every sound of the shovel slicing dirt felt like tearing paper, ripping through the pages of a story I'd been told to believe. When they reached the small coffin, I gripped Grace's arm. My knees wanted to buckle. The coffin was smaller than I remembered, like a doll's bed. They lifted it gently onto a tarp, brushed away the soil, and opened it under the inspector's supervision. There was silence, then a murmur, then stillness. The coffin was empty, no bones, no remains, just a tiny folded blanket, discoloured and eaten by time, resting where a body should have been. My breath left me in one long, strangled gasp. I stumbled backward. Grace caught me, her arms steady around my shoulders. The inspector looked at me with pity, then at Grace, confused. "This isn't a recent disturbance," he said. "There's no sign of tampering. This coffin was buried empty from the beginning." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Only the wind filled the air, whispering through the elm branches like voices long silenced. Empty. All these years I had been mourning air. Grace held me tightly, whispering words I didn't hear. The earth around us blurred, the world narrowed to the echo in my chest. An echo that suddenly had a name. She wasn't lying. She couldn't be. Back home, I sat in my armchair, wrapped in an old blanket, the tin box open on my lap. Grace knelt beside me, holding my shaking hands. "I didn't want it to be true," she said quietly, "but I think it is." I stared at her face, those familiar eyes, the curve of her nose, the small freckle under her left ear. My hands trembled as I reached up and brushed her hair aside to see it closer. The mark was faint but real. I had one too, almost identical, on my own neck. "Dr. Wallace," I whispered. "He did this." Grace nodded. "He had connections. Some of the children he took were adopted into wealthy families overseas, but a few stayed nearby, hidden under forged records. And your mother, your adoptive mother, she had no idea?" "She believed what she was told," Grace said. "She couldn't have children of her own. They told her I was abandoned at a church. She paid a small donation. She thought it was legitimate." My throat closed around a sob. "And she raised you well." "She did," Grace said softly. "She was kind. She loved me. But she always said I had this sadness about me, like something in me was still waiting to be found." I wiped my tears, voice trembling. "And you found me?" Her eyes met mine, shining with tears of her own. "Maybe we found each other." We sat in silence for a while, the clock ticking steadily on the wall. Then Grace took a small white envelope from her bag. "I ordered the test kit," she said, "if you still want to be sure." I nodded. My hands shook as I swabbed the inside of my cheek. She did the same. We sealed the samples, labelled them, and she promised to mail them first thing in the morning. When she left that night, I sat staring at the fireplace until the embers turned to ash. My whole life had been a lie wrapped in good intentions. But under that lie, perhaps something pure still beat, a bond that had never truly died. Over the next few days, I felt the house change. Grace came every morning, her steps soft but steady. She cooked, cleaned, read me poems, even hummed that lullaby again, the one I'd sung when pregnant. I didn't ask how she knew it anymore. I just listened. But then strange things began to happen. One evening, as Grace stepped out to run an errand, I heard the phone ring. When I picked it up, a man's voice rasped through the line, low, urgent, and unfamiliar. "Mrs. Fletcher?" "Yes?" There was a pause, and then, "Stop digging. You don't know what you're inviting." The line went dead. I stood frozen, the receiver pressed against my ear long after the tone had ended. My heart hammered. When Grace returned, I told her. Her face went pale. "I've been getting calls too," she said. "Blocked numbers, someone breathing. Once they whispered, 'You should have stayed buried.'" My skin crawled. "Who would do this?" "Someone who doesn't want us to find out the truth," she said grimly. "Maybe Dr. Wallace, or someone protecting him." I looked toward the window. The night outside seemed to pulse with unseen eyes. For the first time since she arrived, I was terrified not of her, but for her. "Promise me something," I whispered. "What?" "If this gets dangerous, don't come back here. I'm old, but you—" "No," she said firmly, taking my hand. "I've waited my whole life for this. I won't stop now." Her grip was warm and strong, like an anchor in a storm. I squeezed back, my throat aching with something that felt like pride, fear, and love all tangled together. "Then we'll face it," I said softly. "Together." She smiled through the tears welling in her eyes. "Together, Mother." And this time, I didn't correct her. It took nearly a week for the DNA results to arrive, but it felt like months. Every sunrise was a question, every sunset an echo of the same sentence repeating in my head. What if she really is mine? Grace checked the mailbox every morning, returning with hopeful eyes and an empty envelope. We filled the time with memories I hadn't spoken aloud in decades. She asked me to describe the nursery I prepared for my baby, the names I'd considered. "I was going to call her Lily," I told her once, "because she smelled like spring, even before she was born." Her eyes glistened. My adoptive mother used to call me her little Lily when I was a child. I never knew why. The coincidence, if it was one, made my heart twist painfully. The universe was folding back on itself, reminding me that nothing, not even grief, stays buried forever. When the envelope finally came, it was a grey morning heavy with rain. Grace brought it in, her fingers trembling. The air felt thick, the house holding its breath with us. We sat at the kitchen table, the envelope between us like a loaded gun neither of us dared to touch. "Do you want to open it?" she asked. "No," I whispered. "You do it." She tore the seal gently, unfolding the paper with trembling care. I watched her eyes move over the words. Then they widened, glistened, and filled with tears. She looked up, her voice breaking. "It's a match, 99.9%. I didn't cry right away. For a long time, I just sat there, the sound of rain pattering against the window like applause from the heavens. Then the tears came, violent, unrestrained, from somewhere deep inside me that had been clenched for 50 years. Grace dropped to her knees beside me, holding my hands as I sobbed into her shoulder. "My baby," I gasped between tears. "My Lily, my little girl." She was crying too, whispering, "I found you, I found you," over and over, as though saying it would keep the world from taking me away again. We stayed like that for what felt like forever. Mother and daughter, separated by half a century of lies, bound again by truth and tears. But as the hours passed, relief gave way to anger. Because love might heal wounds, but justice demands to know who made them. "Dr. Wallace," I said, my voice trembling but certain. "He did this. He sold my baby. He forged the papers. I want to see him." Grace hesitated. "He's old now, 91. In a private nursing home 2 towns over. I found the address." "Then we'll go," I said. She tried to protest. "You don't have to." "I do," I interrupted. "He took something from me that no mother should lose. I need to look him in the eye and hear the truth from his own mouth before God takes him first." So we went. The drive was long and quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving the roads slick and shining like mirrors. The nursing home was a white, sterile building tucked between pine trees, the kind of place where time slows to a crawl and the smell of bleach hides too many secrets. We checked in under false names. Grace said it was safer that way. The receptionist barely looked up. "Room 112, she said, "but he doesn't talk much anymore." The hallways hummed with the faint sound of televisions and wheeled trolleys. My legs ached, but my anger carried me forward. When we reached the door, Grace glanced at me, waiting for my nod. I gave it. Inside, Dr. Wallace sat by the window in a wheelchair, wrapped in a blanket. He was frail now, his skin paper-thin, his once black hair turned silver. But his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, still held the same cold precision I remembered. "Dr. Wallace," I said quietly. He turned his head slowly. "Who's there?" "It's Margaret Fletcher," I said, my voice low, deliberate. "Maplewood Hospital, 1974. His eyes flickered. Recognition, fear, something. Then a thin smile. "Ah, the mother." Grace stiffened beside me. "You remember?" He chuckled weakly. "I remember everything." I moved closer, my hands trembling but firm. "You told me my baby was dead. You made me bury an empty box. Why?" He studied me for a long moment, his eyes drifting toward Grace. "So it found its way back," he murmured. "I wondered if it ever would." "Answer me," I demanded, voice shaking. He sighed, a rattling breath. "You wouldn't have understood, Mrs. Fletcher. You were young, emotional. The child was valuable, healthy, perfect, and there were couples, wealthy couples, who would pay anything for a baby when nature denied them one." My heart slammed against my ribs. "You sold her?" He tilted his head, indifferent. "I gave her a better life." Grace stepped forward, fury in her voice. "You stole me. You forged records. You made my mother believe I was dead." His eyes sharpened, a cruel glint surfacing beneath the wrinkles. "And yet here you are, educated, alive, cared for. You should be thanking me." I lunged forward, gripping the arm of his chair. "You destroyed me," I hissed. "You turned a mother into a mourner for 50 years." He only smirked. "You think you're the only one? There were dozens, maybe hundreds, babies traded like stock certificates. You were lucky I kept the records clean enough that your daughter could even find you." Grace's voice trembled with disgust. "You still have the records?" He smiled faintly. "Locked away, my dear. Safe. I kept copies, insurance. They're worth more than the babies ever were." "Where?" I demanded. He turned his gaze toward me, his lips curling into a frail, mocking grin. "You think I'd tell you? You wouldn't even know where to look." Grace reached into her bag, pulled out a small voice recorder and set it on the table. "Then maybe the police will want to know what's left of your conscience." For the first time, his smile faltered. "You shouldn't meddle in things you don't understand, girl." "I understand enough," she snapped. I understand my life was stolen before it even began." The old man laughed, a dry, cracked sound. "Do you know why you survived? Why you're here at all? Because I saved you from her." I froze. "What?" He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with venomous amusement. "She was hemorrhaging, dying. The baby would have gone with her. I saved the child, not the mother. You were supposed to die, Mrs. Fletcher. I made a choice, and it worked." Grace's face went pale. "That's not true." "It is," he croaked. "The woman who raised you paid handsomely. I took what I needed. Everyone lived happily ever after, until you both started poking ghosts." I couldn't breathe. The room tilted. I wanted to scream, to strike him, to curse the heavens for giving breath to monsters like him. Grace steadied me, her hand on my shoulder. We turned to leave, but as we reached the door, his voice rasped behind us, low and poisonous. "You think you've won. Someone else has those files now, someone who knows what they're worth, and they'll come for them." Grace stopped, her back stiffening. "Who?" He smiled, eyes fading back toward the window. "Ask the nurse who took your photograph. She's not as innocent as she claimed." Then his eyes went dull, his head drooping forward. Whether he was asleep or gone, I didn't care. We walked out in silence, our hearts pounding with a new fear. Outside, the rain had started again, soft but relentless. Grace gripped the steering wheel as we drove away, her face pale and tight. "What did he mean?" I whispered. She shook her head. "I don't know, but I think someone else is still profiting from what he did." And deep down I felt it too, that our story, our reunion, was only the beginning of something much darker. We drove home in silence. The rain smudged the windshield like tears the sky didn't want to shed publicly. I sat in the passenger seat, fingers laced together so tightly that my knuckles were white. Grace didn't speak, but I could see the muscle in her jaw twitching, a silent storm brewing behind her calm face. When we finally reached the house, I felt something strange. The air inside was different, still but heavy. The kind of stillness that isn't peace but warning. Grace noticed too. She froze near the door, scanning the hallway. Then her eyes darted to the kitchen counter. The tin box was gone. "Oh my God," she whispered. "The box. It was here when we left." My chest tightened. That tin was all we had. The Polaroid, the bracelet, the papers, everything. Proof of what Wallace had done. "Are you sure you didn't move it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She shook her head. "I locked the door. No one else has a key." But someone had been here. Someone who wanted to make sure the truth stayed buried. Grace ran to the back door. It was slightly ajar, the latch broken clean through. A muddy footprint trailed across the tiles. "They found us," she muttered under her breath. "They knew we'd visit him." I could barely stand. "The files," I rasped. "He said someone else has them. Someone dangerous." Grace turned to me, her face pale but resolute. "Then that means they're not done yet. They'll want to erase every trace." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the creak of the old house settling under the rain's weight. Then, quietly, I said, "He mentioned the nurse, the one in the photograph. Maybe she's the key." Grace hesitated, then nodded. "Her name's Evelyn Burke. She's the one who gave me the photo. She said she worked under Wallace for 2 years before quitting. She might know more, or she might be part of it." "Where is she now?" "She lives up north, near the coast. I have her address." "Then we go," I said firmly. "Tonight." Grace tried to protest, but I silenced her with a look. I buried my heart once. I'm not letting anyone bury it again. By the time we reached Evelyn Burke's cottage, the night had swallowed the sky. The house stood alone on a small hill, surrounded by wind-bent trees. The porch light flickered weakly. Grace knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder. Still nothing. But just as she turned to leave, the door creaked open. An elderly woman stood there, her thin hair silver, her face lined but alert. She looked at us warily. "Who are you?" "I'm Margaret Fletcher," I said softly, "and this is my daughter Grace." Something flickered in her eyes, a recognition, a fear she couldn't hide. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Grace stepped forward. "You told me Dr. Wallace stole babies. You gave me the photo, the bracelet, everything. Now the proof is gone. Someone broke into my mother's house." Evelyn's lips trembled. "You were followed." "I don't know," Grace said, "but whoever took that box wants to erase what Wallace did." The old nurse looked out into the darkness beyond us, her eyes scanning the trees as if she expected shadows to move. "They never stopped," she murmured. "Not completely." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" She motioned us inside quickly. "Hurry, before anyone sees." The house smelled of dust and lavender. Old photographs lined the walls, people in hospital uniforms, smiling for the camera, unaware of the rot behind their white coats. Evelyn shut the curtains and locked the door. "Dr. Wallace wasn't alone," she said in a low voice. "He had partners, wealthy people who funded his private adoptions, politicians, judges, families with names that never saw newspapers for the wrong reasons. When the hospital shut down, he made deals to keep quiet. But those files, those lists, if they ever got out, it would ruin them all." "And you?" I asked. "Why did you help him?" She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I didn't know at first. I was 23, fresh out of nursing school. They told me we were helping women, giving babies to loving homes when mothers couldn't afford them. I believed it until one night I saw Wallace switch the tags on 2 newborns. One alive, one stillborn. The next day, the wrong mother was told her baby had died. That mother was you." My throat closed. I swayed where I stood. "You knew?" I whispered. "You knew and said nothing?" Her tears fell freely now. "I was scared. Wallace had power. He had men who made people disappear. I quit, moved away. I kept one photo, yours, because I couldn't forget what I'd done. When Grace found me, I thought maybe it was God's way of giving me a chance to make it right." Grace's eyes blazed. "Then help us now. Wallace said someone else has the files. Who?" Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached for an old tin trunk near her fireplace. "Before he died, Wallace sent me a letter. He said if anything happened to him, his associate would collect the rest. That man was a lawyer named Charles Hargrove. He handled all the adoptions, the money, the forged certificates. He's still alive, lives in the city." Grace leaned forward. "Do you have proof?" Evelyn opened the trunk. Inside were stacks of old envelopes, receipts, and a single small notebook. "I kept copies," she whispered. "Names, dates, payments. If anyone finds out I have them, they'll kill me." Before Grace could answer, the window behind us shattered. A rock flew through, landing near the fireplace. Attached to it was a note. Grace snatched it up and read it aloud. "Stop digging, or next time it won't be glass that breaks." Evelyn gasped. "They know you're here!" Grace pulled me close, her voice trembling but fierce. "We have to leave, now." Evelyn shoved the notebook into my hands. "Take it! Everything's in there. The proof, the names. End this before they end you." We ran to the car as headlights flashed in the distance, 2 vehicles pulling up the hill. Grace started the engine and we sped off just as figures stepped out of the cars behind us. Through the rearview mirror I saw them, 2 men in dark coats standing in the rain, watching us vanish into the night. We didn't stop driving until dawn. My heart thudded in my chest like it wanted to escape. Grace's hands were tight on the wheel, her eyes fierce. "We're going to the police," I said finally, clutching the notebook. "No," she said, shaking her head. "If Wallace's clients were as powerful as she said, we can't trust anyone. Not yet." "Then what do we do?" She looked at me, jaw set, determination etched into her face. "We go to the press. If the truth can't be buried quietly, they'll have no power left." I stared at her, the daughter I thought I'd lost, now protecting me like I was the child. For the first time in 50 years, I felt something stronger than fear. Hope. By the time we reached the city, the sun had risen behind grey clouds, staining the skyline with dull gold. I hadn't slept, and neither had Grace. The notebook Evelyn gave us lay on my lap, its pages brittle, its ink faded but legible. Inside were names I recognized, doctors, judges, even a senator's wife. Each entry listed payments, initials, and the phrase, "placement confirmed." My hands shook as I turned the pages. Every line was a stolen life. Every name, a mother who cried over an empty crib. Grace parked near an old diner off the highway. She looked exhausted, her hair damp with rain, her voice quiet but sharp. "We can't just hand this to any reporter. We need someone who isn't owned." "You sound like your father," I murmured. Her brow furrowed. "You mean Robert?" I nodded slowly. He was a journalist, the kind who believed truth should never come with a price tag. She blinked, stunned. "I didn't know that." A sad smile touched my lips. "He gave up writing after you died. He said some stories kill the people who tell them. Maybe it's time to finish what he couldn't." Grace took my hand. "Then let's tell it right." We spent the next day contacting independent journalists, people known for digging into the kind of corruption polite society pretended didn't exist. One woman, Clara Henson, agreed to meet us in a quiet cafe downtown. She'd written exposés on illegal adoptions before. When Grace told her our story, Clara didn't interrupt once. She just listened, her pen moving fast. "Do you have proof?" she asked finally. Grace placed the notebook on the table. "Everything's in here. The network, the payments, even Dr. Wallace's records." Clara's eyes widened. "This could blow open half the city." "That's the point," I said softly. "He made us believe our babies were dead. It's time everyone knew who buried them." She nodded, tucking the notebook carefully into her satchel. "I'll verify everything. You'll both need to stay somewhere safe until I publish. Once this goes public, they'll come for you again." Grace exhaled. "We can handle it." But that night, as we drove back to my house, a dark car followed us for miles. Grace noticed first. "They're behind us," she whispered. My pulse quickened. "Maybe it's a coincidence." "It's not." She took a sudden turn down an old side road. The car followed, her jaw set. "Hold on." The road was slick, the trees closing in on both sides. Grace accelerated, the engine groaning in protest. Then, just as the other car drew closer, its headlights flared, and then vanished. It had stopped. Grace slowed, her knuckles white on the wheel. "They're warning us," she said through gritted teeth. "They could have hit us if they wanted to." I looked behind us. The empty road shimmered with rain. "Then let's not give them another chance." By the time we got home, exhaustion had swallowed me whole. Grace checked every lock twice, drew every curtain. I tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept returning to the graves, the notebook, the faces of women who would never know their children lived. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the faint sound of humming, the same lullaby. I sat up, heart pounding. It came from the living room. "Grace!" I called. No answer. I reached for my cane and shuffled down the hallway. The living room was dark except for the dim light of the fireplace. Grace was sitting there, her back to me, the flames reflecting in her eyes. "You should be asleep," I said softly. She turned, smiling faintly. "Couldn't." "What are you thinking about?" She stared into the fire. "How much a life is worth. How men like Wallace put prices on babies like me, as if love was a currency they could print." I sat beside her, the old couch groaning under our weight. "They didn't win, Grace. You're proof of that. You lived. You found me." Her eyes glistened. "And now they'll never hide again." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time since she entered my life, I let my hand rest in her hair, stroking it the way I'd imagined doing 50 years ago. The next morning, the news broke. Clara had worked fast. Her article went live just after dawn. "The Maplewood Black Market: How a Doctor Sold Grief to the Wealthy." It spread like wildfire. Every major outlet picked it up. Wallace's associates were named, photos released, government officials questioned. The public outrage was unstoppable. Grace and I sat by the radio, listening as reporters spoke the names that had been buried for decades. Each one felt like a candle being lit in the darkness. Then came the knock on the door. Grace tensed. "Stay here." She opened it cautiously. 2 officers stood on the porch, rain dripping from their hats. "Ms. Fletcher?" one asked. "We're here to ensure your safety. We have word that your involvement in the Maplewood investigation may have put you at risk." Grace nodded warily. "From who?" Before he could answer, a gunshot cracked through the air. The window beside me shattered. I screamed as Grace lunged toward me, pulling me down behind the couch. The officers drew their weapons, shouting into the darkness. Tires screeched outside, the attackers fleeing. When silence returned, my ears rang with the echo of what could have been our last moment. They moved us that night. Police protection, new location, new names. Clara's report had done more than expose corruption. It had woken sleeping devils. But the public outcry was too loud now. Within days, arrests began. Hargrove, the lawyer, a former senator's wife, 3 nurses. Others fled. Dr. Wallace's body was found 2 days later in his nursing home, a vial of morphine by his hand. The world called it suicide. I called it cowardice. Weeks passed, the storm faded. Grace and I stayed in a safe apartment near the sea. She'd found work caring for elders again, only this time she came home to me every night. Sometimes when the waves hit the rocks, I imagined the sound was the earth exhaling after holding its breath too long. One evening she came in holding a small bouquet of lilies. "For you," she said. I smiled, tears warming my eyes. "You remembered." "How could I forget?" she said, placing them in a vase. "You named me after them." We sat by the window, the sunset painting her face gold. "Do you ever think about the others?" I asked quietly. "Every day," she said. "But we did what we could. Maybe it'll help another daughter find her mother." The sea roared outside. I looked at her, the same brown eyes that had haunted me in dreams, now right here beside me. "Grace," I whispered, "when I buried that empty box, I thought I'd buried my heart with it. But you dug it back up." She smiled through tears, taking my hand. "You gave me life twice, Mother. Once when I was born, and again when you believed me." I squeezed her fingers. "Then maybe this time we both get to live." We sat there until the last light faded, the lilies glowing pale in the dusk. Somewhere in the world, mothers still mourn empty graves, and daughters still wonder whose lullaby they remember. But tonight, in this quiet room by the sea, one mother and one daughter found each other again. And that, I think, is enough to make even God stop and listen.